Africa, a continent long underestimated, long controlled, long pushed into the margins of global power. But today, everything is changing. Because Africa has just activated a $10 trillion strategic plan, a coordinated economic, political, and resource-driven shift that threatens to collapse centuries of Western control over global markets, minerals, trade routes, and global influence. This is not a conspiracy. This is not speculation. This is documented policy unfolding right now, driven by African governments, African institutions, and African billion-dollar corporations. And the West is terrified. Welcome to the full breakdown of Africa's most powerful move in modern history. Welcome to New Africa Rising. For over 500 years, Western nations controlled Africa's resources, Africa's markets, Africa's governments, Africa's military alliances, Africa's currency systems. But in the last decade, quietly and steadily, African nations have started rewriting the rules. The West expected Africa to remain dependent. Instead, Africa became the fastest-growing region on Earth. AFCFTA unified the continent. The Sahel expelled foreign military bases. The BRICS expansion opened the door to new alliances. African leaders began rejecting Western influence openly and fearlessly. The old global order is collapsing, and standing at the center of the new one is Africa. Africa's $10 trillion plan is not a single document. It is the combined force of 5 coordinated African strategies worth over $10 trillion in natural value, trade, and future economic potential. These 5 pillars are shaking the world. Pillar 1, resource nationalization, worth over $3.8 trillion. Africa controls 40% of global gold, 90% of global platinum, 70% of global cobalt, 80% of global manganese, 50% of key EV minerals, the world's largest untapped energy reserves. For centuries, the West extracted these resources for pennies. But today, Africa is banning raw exports. Africa is forcing global companies to process locally. Africa is taxing foreign miners heavily. Africa is taking ownership of its mineral destiny. Zimbabwe banned raw lithium exports. Namibia did the same with critical minerals. Tanzania banned raw gemstone exports. Botswana took control of its diamond industry. DRC is building its own EV battery industry. Ghana and Guinea are nationalizing bauxite refining. The world suddenly realized Africa is no longer the world's mine. Africa is becoming the world's factory. This alone creates trillions of dollars in retained value. Pillar 2, AFCFTA, the one market to rule them all. Worth $3.4 trillion. In one signature, Africa became the largest free trade zone on Earth, a unified market of 1.4 billion people, a $3.4 trillion integrated economy for the first time in history. Africans can produce, move, trade, and sell across the continent without colonial borders blocking them. Western corporations lost their biggest advantage, dividing African countries and negotiating one by one. Now Africa negotiates as one bloc. This is terrifying for nations used to controlling African markets, because a unified Africa is economically unstoppable. Pillar 3, the new defense and military realignment, geopolitical value, trillions in influence, the West's greatest fear? Africa building its own security alliances. And now it's happening. The Sahel alliance kicked out France. ECOWAS is collapsing and being replaced by new African-led security structures. African nations are buying weapons from non-Western sources. African militaries are cooperating more than ever before. BRICS Plus welcomed African members, giving Africa global military leverage. For the first time since colonialism began, Africa is building the power to defend itself. That means Western military control is dying. And without military control, political control collapses. Pillar 4, the new financial order, long-term value, $2 to $3 trillion. Africa's banking systems are integrating. Payment systems are merging. Central banks are coordinating. But the biggest shock? Several African blocs are now considering a joint currency, supported by African gold, African minerals, African industrial production. Why is the West panicking? Because Africa has the resources to create the strongest asset-backed currency on Earth. If Africa creates its own currency, backed by its mineral wealth, The US dollar collapses in Africa. The CFA franc dies in West Africa. Western financial control disappears. This is the key to Africa's true liberation. And global powers know it. Pillar 5. The African Industrial Revolution. Africa is no longer exporting raw resources. Africa is now building car factories, steel plants, refining hubs, EV battery factories, solar manufacturing, smartphone assembly lines, pharmaceutical hubs. Companies from Europe, the US, and China are being forced. If you want African resources, you must build in Africa. This changes everything. It turns a $50 raw mineral into a $500 finished product, a $200 raw material into a $3,000 battery, a $10 or into a $300 component. This shift alone generates trillions in new African value. And Western industries are terrified because they can no longer rely on cheap African extraction. The collapse of Western control is not military. It is structural. The West relied on 5 things: controlling African minerals, controlling African currencies, controlling African governments, controlling African militaries, controlling African trade. Africa is breaking all 5 at the same time. By 2035, Africa will have a larger workforce than China. Africa will be the world's youngest, fastest growing region. African megacities will dominate innovation. African technology firms will be global competitors. African agriculture will feed continents. The West cannot stop this. They can only adapt or be left behind. Western companies lose control of African resources. No more cheap cobalt. No more cheap gold. No more colonial-style mining. Africa dictates the price now. 2. Western political influence collapses without economic leverage. Western governments lose their power to pressure African leaders. 3. The IMF and World Bank lose dominance. BRICS, Middle East sovereign funds. African Development Bank, private African capital. The era of Western financial dominance is fading. 4. The West loses its biggest markets. Africa is now trading more with itself. Asia, BRICS nations, Middle Eastern partners. Western exports will suffer. 5. Western currency control dies. An African currency could trigger a historic challenge to the U.S. dollar's influence. This is why analysts say the 21st century will be shaped in Africa, not the West. Ethiopia, the industrial hub, massive manufacturing zones. Global textile power. Military rising. Nigeria, the financial giant, huge fintech sector. Massive population. Oil, gas, tech, trade. Egypt, the strategic powerhouse, controls the Suez Canal. Military strength. Growing tech sector. South Africa, the industrial backbone. Minerals, banks, manufacturing, BRICS influence. Kenya, the tech capital, fintech, startups, innovation. Algeria, the energy superpower, oil, gas, weapons, growing alliances. Congo, the mineral king, holds the world's most important minerals for the future. Together, they are forming a new center of global power. Africa's $10 trillion plan will reshape global supply chains, global currencies, global energy markets, global geopolitics, global manufacturing, global technology, global diplomacy. By 2050, Africa will be the 3rd largest economic region. Africa will have the largest workforce on Earth. Africa will control the most strategic minerals on the planet. Africa will be a superpower in everything except name. This is not a dream. This is a trajectory backed by hard numbers. The world order is shifting, and Africa is not rising slowly. Africa is rising explosively. Closing narration. Africa's $10 trillion plan is not about revenge, not about domination, not about destroying the West. It's about freedom. It's about ownership. It's about rewriting history on African terms. For the first time in modern civilization, Africa is not asking. Africa is not waiting. Africa is not begging. Africa is deciding. And the world has no choice but to adjust. This is the new era. This is the power shift. This is New Africa Rising.